Welcome to Women Mastering Midlife, where we dive deep into the rich complexities of womanhood in our middle years. I'm your host, Victoria Byrd, a pharmacist, certified women's health coach, and your guide on this transformative journey. Whether you're navigating perimenopause, thriving in menopause, or mastering midlife's many transitions, this is your weekly dose of expert guidance, compassionate support, and a judgment-free space to explore it all. Here, we're empowering women to master midlife on their terms, reclaiming our health, our happiness, and our power. Together, we'll rewrite the narrative around this remarkable stage of life, from something to dread into a beautiful, bold transition. I'm so glad you're here. Hi, Terry. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. And I'm so delighted to have our listeners hear a little bit about your story and how you're using your story to help others.
Thank you, Victoria, for having me. I really appreciate it. It's my absolute pleasure.
So can you share a little bit about your personal journey, what led you into the world of fitness, nutrition, and hormone health?
Absolutely. So honestly, I did not wake up one day and say, I want to be a coach. I became the client first, is how I ended up here. Because in my 40s, I found myself overworked, overstressed, 80 pounds overweight. I had a successful business at the time, but I was completely disconnected from my own body. And one day I realized I was outsourcing my well-being to everyone but me. And I had to take that power back. So that's when everything changed. That's when I actually stopped doing my previous business. I took a really long break. I was very burned out. I had 2 hospitalizations at that time because I thought I was having a heart attack. I had pre-diabetes. I had all the things on top of being overweight. And so I took a little bit of time off just to get my act together, right? And I hired a coach, and she helped me learn how to strength train, how to eat a macro-based nutrition type of food. I had to rebuild my relationship with food, and I had to completely shift everything, my entire approach to health. And so now I have discovered through this transformation that took a few years that this is my purpose, my passion. I want to do this, and I want to pass my knowledge down to other women to help them get out of that funk, be it, or whatever it may be, that overwhelm, and to reclaim themselves again.
Yeah, I feel like for a lot of coaches, it happens to be that it's the life experience that brings us to the point of, wow, this made a huge impact on me, and now I need to help other women the same way.
Absolutely. I mean, and you know, it's really hard sometimes to take advice from someone who hasn't really lived in your body, who may not have had the same life experience, who did not have to juggle career and family and all these things, because it's so hard to relate. So, for me, it was really important for me to have a coach that could understand what it's like to be a woman, to be in a woman's body and all these things. And so I feel like that's essentially what I bring to the table is I really have been there. I've juggled all the things. I've lived through chronic diseases, acute chest pains, being overweight, having to juggle children, family, career, all the things. And, you can come out of it. You can come out on the other side, thriving, really.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you say that, for not to completely knock our male counterparts, but they don't get it. It's not the same. It's absolutely not the same.
No, it's not the same. But, just thinking about it, it's not that different. And the male coaches that I've had have actually taught me a lot about intensity, a lot about how to truly build strength, how to push myself. And I'm very grateful to them as well. But I think in the very beginning for me, it was really important to have kind of a female perspective. And then you kind of graduate more into, once you kind of find your groove, you can graduate to a different type of coach. So yeah, I think both sides work really well. It just depends on where you are.
Yeah. So would you tell me a little bit about that turning point in your life that shaped your approach to emotional eating and body transformation?
So it's a very distinct moment, and it wasn't an aha moment or anything like that, but I will never forget. So I got hospitalized twice. The first time, it was for the same thing both times. The first time, it was acute chest pains, and I thought I was having a heart attack. So I rushed to the hospital. They took one look at me, and they immediately admitted me. It felt like I was having a heart attack. And so I was in the hospital for about 2 days, and they couldn't find what was happening. They couldn't find a heart attack, a stroke, nothing. They told me, hey, maybe you need to kind of slow down a little bit. Maybe your lifestyle is not conducive to your health at this time. Go see a cardiologist. And guess what I did?
What'd you do?
Nothing.
Of course.
I was like, I don't have time for this crap. Like, I'll just get over it, right? And so because they couldn't diagnose anything specifically and they couldn't tell me what was going on, I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. Like, this is just a fluke. So I'm just going to keep going because I don't have time to deal with this. And so I continued in the same path, and then it happened again. And so now the second time, they already remembered me. They're like, you're back. What's happening now? And it was the same thing. And they gave me a Xanax pill. They sent me home, and they said, you really need to follow up. And so that's when I decided, okay, well, I don't have time to be in the hospital every other week, right? And so I started taking steps. I got in touch with a holistic doctor. I went to a cardiologist. They couldn't really give me anything medically, very specifically of what was happening. But the holistic doctor did tell me, like, hey, you're 80 pounds or so-ish overweight. That has an impact on all the systems in your body. And yes, you're having anxiety because you're over drinking, you're pretty much on the road to becoming an alcoholic, fully blown. You're eating whatever comes your way. Usually my favorite was half a jar of Nutella right before bed, or, a full pint of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. So I would just kind of cope with my state of being and being exhausted, emotionally drained, and looking for relief. I was coping with food, and couldn't understand why I was where I was at.
So when you went to this holistic doctor and they said you have to start changing your lifestyle and you need to lose the 80 pounds, what was the first thing that you did? What was your first small step that you did that started the change?
Oh boy, I overzealous, right? I am an overachiever.
Okay. So you jumped right in, into the deep end.
I said, I'm going to figure this out. I got this. I researched. I did a ton of research. I found out that there are 40,000 diet books on Amazon.
Of course there are.
I probably read half of them. There are hundreds of diets out there. I mean, holy cow, okay? The world that I entered at that time was even more overwhelming than everything that I was going through. And so I found some diets, right? So the stuff that was out there 10 years ago, and I'm 48 now, so it was about 11 years ago. It was keto. Keto was the thing back then.
Yes.
And so I went from eating half a jar of Nutella and a pint of ice cream every day to who the heck knows what else I was eating. I mean, it was all kinds of junk, mostly sugar and alcohol. I went to eating 30 carbs per day.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So I went from one extreme to the other extreme, and I white knuckled it for probably I think I lasted about 2 months, and I probably lost about 10 pounds. And I was like, man, there's something wrong with me. I can't do this. Like I fell off the wagon, a couple of weeks into it, and all the weight came back plus some, right? So I lost 10 and then I gained 15 back. And so, the sentiment was there's something wrong with me. Everybody's doing this. It works for everybody. It doesn't work for me. I'm fundamentally flawed and broken, right? It's me that it doesn't work for. So then I went to the next thing. I did the South Beach diet. That worked for a little bit. I white knuckled that. Again, fell off the wagon, unsustainable. And now looking back, I understand that, but I didn't know it at the time. I did the fruitarian. I did the juice diet. I did the intermittent fasting thing. I did all of them. Okay. There was just too many to name. So, and I was determined. I was not quitting. I tried every diet I got my hands on that sounded like it worked. And there were people claiming that it was working for them and the results were incredible, but none of them worked. So after each diet, I got heavier and heavier and heavier. And so at one point I said, okay, this is craziness. Diets don't work. There's something wrong with me, but all these diets, none of them work for me. And now when I look back, the pattern was extremely restrictive diet with completely unsustainable methods. You fall off and then you dive into all the things that you were white knuckling and restricting during the diet, and now you overdo it on the pendulum swings to the other side because now you're overcompensating for the restriction, severe restriction that I was putting myself into. And so I did that for probably about 1.5 years.
Okay.
Until it finally dawned on me that, I need help. It's not working. And so I hired a coach. And that's when everything changed for me. I learned macros. I learned how to balance my meals. I learned that protein needs to be included in every meal. Carbs are not the enemy. And when you learn how to properly structure your plate, you don't necessarily have crazy cravings and may not potentially be inclined to overeat emotionally at the end of the day. And so that worked really well for about 9 months. I did great. And I kept it off. And then something happened. I got kind of blindsided and I dived back into the Nutella. So I went back to my coping mechanism, which was to eat foods that were not in line with my goal or what I was trying to achieve or my health. And so that's when I realized that, and I didn't even know there was such a thing as emotional eating back then. Mm-hmm. So my coach said, yeah, you have an emotional eating disorder. You have an eating disorder. And so in true overachiever fashion, I was like, no way. I don't even know what that is. That's not a real thing. What in the heck, right? And so I, again, dismissed it. I thought it was some made up thing, but it stuck with me. It stayed in my awareness. And I started noticing and having kind of observing myself in the moment mm-hmm. that I was using essentially, right? So using as in almost like a substance. I was using food as a coping mechanism. And I didn't have a problem with food. I had a different problem.
So once you realized that there was an emotional eating pattern and a disorder, what are some things that you started to identify in that pattern that you needed to change, and how did you go about that?
Yeah, so I noticed that I was using food to regulate myself. So regulate my emotions, regulate my nervous system. I was using food not as fuel physically because I was physically hungry, but I was using it to soothe, to distract, to numb myself. I would grab snacks if I was stressed, if I was overwhelmed, bored. It didn't matter. And what I've learned now that I did not know back then is how to differentiate emotional hunger versus physical hunger. And so when the emotional hunger comes in, it's very urgent, and it feels like an emergency, and it comes on very suddenly, and it feels really good, like almost like a high in the moment as it's happening. Obviously, it doesn't feel so great after. But that is one of the signals that I learned that, real hunger, physical hunger, does not, come in the spur of a moment. Like, you gradually build up to being hungry. And it's not an emergency. Like, it's not, one minute you're fine, and then the next minute you must have the Nutella immediately, or you can't function, right? And so that kind of compulsion and that kind of disconnection from what was the difference between physical hunger and emotional hunger is where, I was ending up in that loop, right? Because then I would have the reaction to the emotional hunger, I would dive into the Nutella, and then the loop began once again.
Yeah, and that's really interesting to hear that emotional hunger is an instant, like you have to feed yourself immediately versus the growing hunger pains of being physically hungry. And I think, we see the movies where the women they're broken up with and they sit on the couch with a tub of Haagen-Dazs and they're eating and they're sobbing, and it kind of projects that this is a way we can feed ourselves when we are feeling emotionally starved or stressed or overwhelmed. And I know my thing was eating bored. Whenever I'd be bored, I would definitely wander into the pantry. I knew I wasn't really hungry. I didn't necessarily need anything. And all the kids' snacks would be sitting there. And it's like, what can I do with my hands and my mouth to keep myself busy? So I think that that's really common for a lot of women, is not only just the emotional eating, but also eating out of boredom or stress to try to fix those feelings.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, and it's so interesting because in the process of becoming a coach, I actually did a 9-month course on emotional eating, and it was so interesting. They differentiate in the course between emotional primary foods and secondary foods. And interestingly, I mean, this really blew my mind. Primary foods are not actual foods we eat. Primary foods are emotional foods. So things like love, appreciation, joy, creativity, all those types of feelings that we consume energetically is what is referred to as primary food. And then secondary food is the food that we eat for physical purposes, right? For our physical well-being. And so I found it to be really interesting that emotional hunger is the deficiency in primary foods, nutrition, right? So if we're not feeling a certain way in our lives, we tend to grab physical food like sugar, chocolate, things like that.
That's interesting. So the secondary foods are for body nourishment, and the primary foods are more the emotional nourishment. So when you work with women and you help them establish the difference, are there things that you're looking for with them, or tools that you use to help them understand where they're primary nutrient deficient?
Yes. So for example, when someone is saying that they're consistently feeling underappreciated, or they have decision fatigue, for example, or body image frustration, or they're having a lot of hormonal dysregulation. Maybe there's grief. Maybe there are unmet expectations or changing roles, or, just anything that creates a nervous system dysregulation or emotional dysregulation, those are usually a lot of times triggers that can lead to emotional eating as we're using food as a quick fix. It's, I mean, if we think about it, it's legal, it's socially acceptable, right? And there's no rehab for it, And so it becomes a really easy way to use any like substances in general that we don't want to use, but it's, again, a way to regulate the nervous system.
Your body's needs evolve with age, and so should your fitness and nutrition plan. My Fitness and Nutrition Over 40 guide provides strategies to stay strong, energized, and healthy in midlife. Embrace the changes and thrive. Get your free guide today at missvictoriabyrd.com/free-guides. You'll also find the link in the show notes below. Are there tools that you specifically use for women when they're in the moment of realizing that they are they're triggered to emotionally eat? What are some tools that you use for women who are in that place?
Yeah, so the first thing is gain the awareness that it's happening in the first place, right? So a lot of us, when we are eating emotionally, we don't have the awareness. It's not really at the top of our minds, right? So the first thing is identify that is the pattern or the habit that you're participating in. And then when you feel that sudden urgency, that feeling like I have to have this, whatever it may be, sometimes it's potato chips, something crunchy, something creamy, ice cream cold, whatever it may be, pause. All right. So take a pause, take a deep breath before you react. Right. And if the craving passes, great. Many times it won't. And, people ask me all the time, well, how long does it take to get over this? It could be months, it could be years, and it's okay, because the first step to healing is to become aware of it and then take a pause, breathe, take 90 seconds, see if you still want it. And if you do, that's okay. There's no judgment to that. You're going to keep repeating, right? We're going to put the reps in. And then the next thing is, check in with the craving, right? So what am I feeling right now? How am I feeling? Am I physically hungry? Did I eat enough food today? Because a lot of us have a tendency not to eat all day, right? And so at the end of the day, we're famished, right? And it may truly be physical hunger. So do an audit. How much did I eat today? What did I eat today? Did I eat protein? Did I have enough carbs, vegetables, things like that? And if you did, and you know that you had all of your meals, but you're still looking for an entire jar of Nutella, it gives you clues, right? So you're building a case of evidence where you're like, okay, let me figure this out, right? Let's go through all of the items that could be happening, right? Let's diagnose ourselves. And then instead of reaching for whatever it may be, take a 5-minute walk, right? Or do 100 jumping jacks, or find a way to shift that emotional charge that you feel to something else. But, something active, something where you're moving. And then the next thing I ask is, can we do a substitution? Right? Because when I was going through this journey in the very beginning, there was no way I was going to be able to resist the ice cream. There was no way. I was at some point going to fall into it. And so I decided that, okay, I'm going to put insurance into place. I'm going to stock my freezer with protein ice cream. And I bought a creamy machine. It's a Ninja Creamy machine. You can make your own batter in a sense, and you can throw it into the machine. It creamifies it, and you have a protein ice cream that is 200 calories rather than the 1,500 calorie pint of something that you buy at the store, right? And so I gave myself permission to still use ice cream as a cooling down or soothing mechanism, but it's still aligned with my health, and I did not completely sabotage all the work that I did in the previous months. And then the next thing is call a friend or write a voice note to yourself, right? Record yourself, talk to yourself, coach yourself through it. A lot of times, what we truly need is something that we can give ourselves. We can be our own best friend. We can coach ourselves through these difficult moments. And, next time you have that episode occur, go back to your voice notes and listen to yourself, talk to yourself through it.
Yeah, I think that mentioning the Ninja Creamy, which I have one and I love it. And there's so many different recipes that you can make that are so much better for you than traditional store-bought ice cream. But one of the things that I think that just reminded me is that you don't necessarily have to eliminate or have an extensively restrictive kind of diet to make better choices for your health. And I think that in working with a coach who has those suggestions for you, it can make a big difference in the success overall in a long-term lifestyle change.
Absolutely. I mean, the substitution method for me, it was fantastic because, if you've ever eaten emotionally or you have that pattern in your life, you know exactly what I'm saying. There's no way that an episode was going to come up like that and I wasn't just going to say F it and dive in, because it's overpowering. It hijacks your mind and your body, and you're just completely out of control. So I knew that was one way or the other, that was going to happen. And when it did, I was going to be ready, because future me thought of all the different things that could go wrong, and I ensured that I was going to be prepared for that. And there was going to be, and then I could break the loop, right? I could break the cycle of emotional dysregulation, coping mechanism kicks in, face dive into, Haagen-Dazs for 1,500 calories, feel really great for 2 seconds, and then get into that, let me beat myself up for a week. And then the perfectionism kicks in and says, oh, well, you screwed it up already, so might as well just forget the whole thing. And then we feel sorry for ourselves for a week. And then again, we start a week later. And then the whole thing repeats all over again, right? So that whole cycle, I had to figure out how to break it. And so a lot of the conversations that I had inside my own mind while I was going through this was, all right, we're going to have the chocolate, but we're going to have it on our terms, right? We're going to plan it. We're going to figure out how we can still enjoy these things and how we can have our ice cream, but we're going to do it in a controlled way where we're not falling off the cliff.
So how long ago did you start your journey? And so how many years has it been since you've lost the 80 pounds and been working toward helping your emotional eating?
So I started at 37. I found out I had an emotional eating disorder at 40. And then started figuring out how to fix it between 40 to 42. And now I'm almost 49.
Okay. So you've sustainably made this lifestyle choice and been able to maintain a healthy weight and become, interested in fitness and strength training and your long-term health. So it goes to show that there is an actual body of evidence that you have done this and it works for you and you can help others with it. And I think that's one of the things that a lot of women, they get, you get on social media and you see somebody have this amazing journey and it's short term and you don't see that in 5 years something might happen or they have a lapse and they might lose that. So seeing that you've sustained it for so long has to really help your clients see that what you're doing works.
Yes. So are there moments where it still comes up? Yes. Right. And so the thing that I say all the time is, if you're an addict and I'm going to be blunt. If we're using food, we are addicts. That's essentially what it is. The steps to recovering for emotional eating are the same steps as alcohol addiction, a lot of it. Now, with alcohol, it can be completely eliminated from your life, right? You don't have to have alcohol in your house. You never have to walk into a bar. You don't have to go to a club. You can say no. That's not possible with food. So we have to learn how to manage this literally every single day. It's in your face. Every single day, it's in the supermarket. You can go purchase it. Your kids bring it in. There's no escaping it, right? And so we have to learn how to be okay with the trigger foods being around us while still maintaining that feeling of, I can soothe myself. I can still have ice cream if I want to, but on my terms. I can sometimes even have way more ice cream than a pint because it's not going to affect my health in a negative way because I've created a recipe that I can indulge in, and I'm going to be guilt-free of that. And that's okay. That's great. That's what I'm looking for. So does it still come up? Absolutely. But I have better tools now on how to manage the actual caloric intake, which is where we get into trouble, right? And so if you continuously practice this over time, the triggers don't really trigger you anymore, right? Because you're, in a sense, rewiring your brain as well. You're creating new neural pathways. You're creating new ways to respond to the things that would kind of trigger you into this loop, into this cycle. And you're rewiring your own behavior and your own habits. You're learning how to use food in a way that does not get you into the hospital for health issues. You're learning all of that. And so it takes time. So I don't really want anybody to think that you're going to start this and 3 months later, it's going to be all figured out. It's a lot of trial and error. And sometimes some things don't work for some people. And it takes a lot of effort, awareness, consistency, and you have to be really devoted and dedicated that you really want to be able to manage this.
Yeah, I was thinking about the fact that when I decided to have a fat loss journey, my kids, I cleared out the whole pantry. So we had no chips, we had no candy, we had no ice cream, and they would go in the pantry and they'd be like, "Mom, we have no snacks." Like, what is this? And I started to realize that's not sustainable for kids. Plus, also, even just the rule of no candy, or if you say candy at holidays, well, there's Valentine's Day, and then there's Easter, and then there's, and then there's always these holidays. There's Thanksgiving, not Thanksgiving, there's Halloween, and then there's Christmas. And so there's always a reason to have those things coming in. And so as parents, it's a lot harder to say, I'm not going to have those things in the house and around me. You have to learn how to have a relationship with it and understand what's causing you to go for it. If you want to have kids that you're not creating issues for with their own food.
Absolutely. And the other thing I do want to tell everybody is I want to give you hope, because the longer you're doing this, the more your taste buds are going to change. And it's interesting because sugar is considered more addictive than cocaine. And I didn't know this back then. So between the alcohol, the wine, the vodka, the candy, the chocolate, the ice cream, all these things, I was extremely addicted to sugar. But then once you start weaning off and figuring out how to still enjoy whatever it is with less sugar, you're also rewiring your taste buds. So you may not even necessarily find it that appealing anymore or want to have, as much, because you just don't have the taste for it. But yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah. A few years ago, I started switching out to a piece of dark chocolate and getting high quality, good, high content cacao, dark chocolate. And so now if I were to hit the trick or treat bin at Halloween, I would be it's not even worth it to me. I would take a bite and be like, oh, this is not enjoyable.
Right? It's so gross now.
Yes, exactly.
Mhm. Exactly. Oh, I love that example that you just gave. So during my 80-pound weight loss, I gave myself, it was about 15 grams of super high quality, 80% cacao chocolate. And I had that every single day with my coffee. And I really look forward to that. And it was every single day. I did not skip a day. I had my chocolate every day. I just didn't have the whole bar. I love that.
Yeah, and that still incorporated things that you love. It's not an all or nothing. You're still indulging, and I'm sure that felt like a treat and that you could enjoy it, but it wasn't, like you said, the whole bar.
Yes.
So, when you're talking to women and when you're approaching a fat loss or a strength training kind of program, how do you work with your clients and what kind of services do you offer in specific?
Yes. So the first thing is we don't approach it as a punishment. So strength training, I do macronutrition. It's not a punishment. Food is not a punishment. We don't exercise to make up for whatever we ate. It's whatever we eat, we need to enjoy it, right? So every single meal needs to bring you joy in some way. And I found out that that's actually a really interesting aspect to healing your relationship with food, because we're so conditioned to either love it or hate it, right? It's good for you, it's bad for you. Everything you eat has this, emotional kind of association with it. And so I wanted to get away from good foods, bad foods. I don't call what we do dieting. I don't call it your diet plan. I call it your fuel. And it's very strategic because we're using the fuel for our body to be able to function properly. And so resistance training is for supporting bone health, supporting your muscle retention as we get older. It's to honor your energy levels, not destroy them. It's not about getting small. It's really about getting strong. That was a huge shift for me over the years because, I grew up in the 90s when, the ideal body was, extremely thin. And I'm just not built that way. I am more on the muscular side, but that wasn't trendy back then. And so I would loathe myself for having bigger quads and just having, a more muscular frame. And now I'm like, what in the heck was I thinking? Right? I like that now. I like having strength. And so, reconnecting with our bodies is another one, that fighting the body. That's one of my key kind of concepts that I really like to see us be friends with our bodies and rather than be in this contentious relationship. And so that's what we do. We strength train, we honor our bodies, we utilize the magic of macronutrition, which has allowed me to have these substitutions, right? When you understand macros, you understand how to manipulate carbs, fats, and protein to your benefit. And yes, there's a learning curve, and a lot of people think it's too much, but it's a tool, right? It's a tool to kind of give you information on how you can change things around a little bit to fit your goals.
Yeah, I think, anybody who doesn't have a disordered eating situation that's uncontrolled, obviously. There's a lot of women I've worked with who I've said, I don't think macro tracking or calorie counting or anything like that is good for you right now. But at some point, with help of therapy or some sort of clinical person on board, I think everyone should understand macronutrients. And it's not as restrictive as calorie counting or point counting. And I think even when I was in the height of, every lick of peanut butter I would count, it all made so much more sense. And then you do it for a little while and you track your patterns and your habits, and it actually becomes more of understanding portion sizes and doing it more intuitively than having to track. It's not every single minute of every single day you have to watch everything you're eating, and just getting that kind of broad view picture of what macros look like.
Yes, exactly. So you said that so well. So a lot of people think it's so restrictive, it's unsustainable, it promotes disordered eating, and I don't necessarily think it's for everybody. But I think that if you gain an understanding of how to structure your plate, it's really giving you a lot of freedom to be able to, first of all, eat enough food.
Yeah.
Right? To actually not feel shamed into eating the right amount. Because that's the other thing I notice with a lot of clients is, we're conditioned to eat less. Yeah. Right? To always be on a diet, to always be restricting, to always, we don't give ourselves permission to eat food. We're afraid of food. And so it eliminates that issue, in my opinion, because when you have your budget, right, and okay, I have to eat this much in order to meet my daily intake of fuel, in order for me to feel good, to balance my hormones, my emotions, to keep my muscle tissue, because as we get older, we lose muscle tissue, and I have to eat this much. I have 120 grams of protein, for example. It gives you permission to eat the full amount of food, because now you understand that that's not a bad thing necessarily.
Yeah. And I think the first time I ever did a maintenance phase where I was figuring out what my maintenance calories were to stay the same weight, it was actually terrifying, because I'm 5'1", so I'm not a tall person. And typically I was getting anywhere between 1,800 to 2,100 calories a day. Like, that's insanity. Why on earth would I ever think, 10 years ago that I should ever eat that much? Because we were trained, 1,100, 1,200 calories or less. You have to do this many burpees for your Reese's cup or whatever. Whenever Halloween, those horrible memes that would come out that would tell you how many exercises you need to do to burn off or whatever. It's the things we've taught ourselves. I hope the next generation doesn't have to see any of that stuff. But it really is amazing how much food you can actually eat if you're eating nutrient-dense food and you're following a macro profile.
It's mind-blowing, really. So the first time that I did receive my macros, it's so funny because I look at it now and I'm like, wow, that wasn't a lot of food. It was 1,500 calories is where I started, and it was broken down into the macros, but it had very specific amounts I could have, right, within each meal. And so it had to be mostly vegetables and a little bit of starch. And it was a huge amount of plate. Once I put all the vegetables and protein in there, I couldn't eat it all. I could not eat all the food for the day. And it was so interesting because I think I was eating over 4,000 calories before that, but it was all, mostly sugar and ice cream and Nutella. That's where I was getting my calories from. And when I had to eat 1,500 calories of normal, real food from Whole Foods, I couldn't do it. It was too much.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, when I think about, my daughter has this tub of red vines in her room right now. And I went in there and I'm like, I haven't had these in forever. So I looked at it, and 2 or 3 red vines is like 100 calories. But if you think about
wow.
Yeah. But you hold them up and you're like, this is all I get to eat. When you think of, if you have spring mix salad or any kind of vegetable, you're eating a massive amount of food in comparison to just tiny little red vines. And no wonder people get hungry so fast and have to keep going back for more food throughout the day when they're not eating nutrient-dense foods.
Yes, exactly. And that's the realization I feel like macro tracking gave me, is that I learned what the consistency was of what, and what was worth it from my budget per se, right? Mm-hmm. Versus what I was actually eating, and was it really worth it? Like, for example, a glass of wine can cost you anywhere between 30 to 50 carbs, because it's at, about 150 to 200 calories for 150 milligrams. And when you read the label on a glass of wine, it says zero everything, right? It says zero fat, zero carbs, zero protein. But it says, 200 calories. So where do these calories go?
Yeah, exactly.
And the way you track that is you have to choose, do you assign it to fat or do you assign it to carbs? And so roughly it will cost you about 50 carbs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And then if you think about the alcohol, and I don't know, I read a study somewhere that alcohol actually shuts off metabolism of fat. So until your body's processed out the alcohol, that's the primary goal of your body, is to detox the alcohol. So if you decide to have that alcohol, you've shut off your fat burning process. So if you're actively trying to eat properly and lose fat, gain muscle, whatever, you're not doing that if you're drinking alcohol.
Exactly. So anytime you have alcohol, exactly what you said, it has to detox itself. It sees it as poison, essentially. The body sees alcohol as poison.
And those are all things that you learn when you start understanding the appreciation of macronutrients.
Yes, exactly.
So for your clients, do you mostly see women that have emotional eating patterns? Is that your largest base of clients, or is it kind of all over the place?
It's all over the place, really, but I have found that almost all of us have emotional eating patterns. Yeah, it really is. I mean, how can we not? Food is emotional. All food is emotional. We have attachments to certain things. We have a tendency to enjoy something over. I don't really know anyone that says that they're overeating broccoli. It's usually sugar related, right? And so this entire society, or supermarkets, everything from when we're infants all the way to our current age, we are fed a lot of sugar. And so it feels good. It gives you a dopamine hit. You get a little bit of a high from all these foods, and your brain eventually learns that, okay, if I want to feel good, right?
Yeah.
I just need to get a little bit of sugar. And that pattern over time, it develops into this quick fix, right? So the brain is wired, I'm dysregulated, I'm feeling something, quickly fix it, because we don't want to feel this way. So you're conditioned to instantly go for the solution, and that's usually something full of sugar. And so I feel like we're all in this boat, some of us more than others, some of us overdo it, but we're all there. So, and once you start a journey like this, once you start becoming more aware and changing your lifestyle and changing your habits and intentionally driving change, you start to notice like, oh, that's right, I'm doing that, right? You start catching yourself in the moment. And that's when change really happens, is when you see it. So, yeah.
So if anybody is interested in learning more about your business or your health coaching programs or even your story, how do they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at How Good Can It Get? And you can find me on my website, thehouseofrose.com. You can also send me an email if you like, terry@thehouseofrose.com.
Wonderful. I'll put all of that information in the show notes as well for anybody who's listening and wants to grab that. Thank you so much for coming on and talking with me. I think that there's a lot of women out there, especially in this demographic and age group, that can really relate to your journey and what you're doing to help people. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Victoria, for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Women Mastering Midlife. If something you heard today resonated, I'd be so grateful if you'd share it with a friend who might need a little extra support on her midlife journey. Remember, small changes can make a big difference, and you don't have to navigate this transition alone. We will be back next week with more expert guidance and compassionate conversations to help empower you to master midlife on your terms. Until then, you can find us on Instagram at Women Mastering Midlife, or come connect with me directly at Miss Victoria Byrd. And you're looking for deeper connection and support, be sure to join us in the Women Mastering Midlife community. We'd love to continue the conversation with you there. If you've enjoyed this episode, please rate and review this podcast. It helps us reach more amazing women mastering midlife just like you. You'll find all the links from today's episode and ways to connect in the show notes below. See you next time.